On the 18th of October, she wrote a note on her phone. She asked herself whether she would be safe in her room that night, but by then, Tristan was already deep into preparation. This case takes place in Wales in the year 2025. Meet Angela Sheilis. By the autumn of 2025, she was living in Prestatyn, which is in North Wales. She was a qualified teacher working as a teaching assistant in Rhyl High School. The role suited her. She was described as kind, patient, and deeply family-orientated. Her life had long revolved around raising her two sons, Ethan and Tristan. By late 2025, Ethan had left for university, leaving Angela at home alone with Tristan. It was around this time that the household dynamics shifted. Tristan's behavior wasn't exactly great, and Ethan leaving meant that she had to deal with Tristan and his erratic behavior by herself and on a daily basis. This was made all the more difficult in 2025 because she was physically vulnerable at the time. She had injured her knee and was using a crutch. We don't know how she was injured, but it affected how easily she could move around. Tristan had only just turned 18 around this time. He was born on the 13th of October 2007. The full public picture of his life is incomplete, but some features are clear enough. He had been diagnosed in childhood with autism and ADHD. During his upbringing, he had a history of being referred to child and adolescent mental health services, and as he got older, his behavior became increasingly more difficult, and by late 2025, his aggression grew. Neighbors could often hear shouting from the house, and this was Tristan towards his mother, Angela. The atmosphere at home became tense and unstable. Tristan was becoming more volatile and more resentful. He blamed Angela for all of his problems. This was any problem, big or small. He spoke about feeling abandoned and betrayed. However, we don't know exactly what Tristan could have been referring to. Ethan himself had grown increasingly worried about what was happening at home, especially for his mother's safety. When he returned from university for a break, he didn't want to leave her alone. On the 17th of October, she was messaging a social worker and friends because she was so worried about Tristan's mental health. Specifically, it was about the fact that he had a knife and a hammer in his bedroom. The very next day, on the 18th of October, she wrote a note on her phone. She asked herself whether she would be safe in her room that night, but by then, Tristan was already deep into preparation. Because he had just turned 18, he had access to purchase things that he couldn't purchase before. So, he started buying more weapons and protective clothing. He bought a heavy lump hammer, knives, and an axe. It's around this time that he spent hours and hours online researching methods of killing. He would Google how to use the weapons he bought most effectively. He searched for ways to remove blood and DNA from weapons and clothing, which led him to talk to an AI chatbot called DeepSeek, asking the very same questions. He wrote the questions with the clever pretext of writing a horror book to avoid alarming the code of conduct. He even searched for how to dispose of a human body. At around 11 o'clock on the night of the 23rd of October 2025, Tristan, inside the house, prepared to do the unthinkable. He picked up his brand new lump hammer and began walking towards his own mother, and what followed is considered to be one of the most disturbing crimes in recent British history. Tristan hit his own mother in the face with the hammer and strangled her near to death. The blow with the hammer was so significant that she suffered horrific injuries to her face. Now, if this wasn't already disturbing enough, he actually recorded all of this on a dictaphone. Her voice can be heard on a recording saying that he was hurting her. She managed to stay relatively calm and simply requested him to call 999 and to get her some help. She pleaded with him to stop, but instead, he tortured his mother. He controlled her movements inside the house and refused to let her leave the bedroom. At one point, he commanded her to lie down and then told her to put a bag over her head so she could suffocate herself. But then, sometime before 3:20 in the morning, he seemed to change his tune. He persuaded Angela to leave the house with him. telling her that he would take her into town for some medical assistance. Angela may have thought that Tristan had a change of heart, and so she agreed. But before they left, he made her put on a balaclava, presumably to hide the horrific wounds to her face. CCTV and doorbell footage captured the two of them leaving the house together just after 3:20 a.m. Angela was walking with her crutch, and Tristan was carrying a rucksack. What was inside, Angela didn't know, but she was about to tragically find out. The two headed towards Coed y Morfa, also referred to as Morfa Nature Park. To get there, they crossed a railway line. Tristan told her that this was a shortcut to get into town, but at some point during that walk, Angela realized that he was lying. She said that she didn't want to go into the nature reserve. She knew it was quiet and secluded at that time of night, and it just simply wouldn't be safe for her. But by this point, she was already injured, frightened, and physically limited. In other words, she was helpless. Once the two made their way into the reserve, he told her to sit on a bench. She screamed and pleaded with him not to hurt her again, but he ignored her, his own mother. He then took the lump hammer from the rucksack and he walked behind her on the bench. He raised his arms and struck her at least 4 times to the back of the head. These strikes caused catastrophic and ultimately fatal injuries. The killing itself was quick compared to the hours of torment that came before. After Angela was executed by her son, he dragged her body away from the bench and into the undergrowth. It was said to be around 20 feet from the nearest footpath. He left there like she meant nothing to him and walked back home alone. But after a short time, he went back out again. He went back to the park. That second trip appears to have been an attempt to hide any clear evidence. He then returned home once again. There he went online and boasted about what he had done. He said online that he had the craziest day. He also said to his dictaphone, "Oh my God, that was terrifying. That felt so crazy." Tristan then used Angela's mobile phone to send messages pretending to be her. This included messages to Ethan, his very concerned brother. This was in an effort to reassure him and create the impression that she was still alive and was going about her ordinary life. Tristan was not horrified at what he had done in the slightest, no remorse whatsoever. In fact, he seemed to be rather pleased with himself. He was still trying to control the situation. By the time daylight came on the morning of the 24th of October, Angela had been beaten, tortured, and forced through the streets, and then disposed of in the undergrowth by her own son. Angela's body was found later that morning in the bushes. The first call to the police came shortly before 8:40 a.m. on the Friday. Officers cordoned off the scene and asked people to stay away for a while the first stages of the investigation were underway. At that point, Angela had not yet been formally identified, and there wasn't any recent missing person reports. The scene itself contained several telling items. A crutch was near her body, and there was a 100-meter-long blood trail along the path. Gloves were recovered, which were heavily bloodstained, along with the balaclava. While officers were working to secure the crime scene, family members were already becoming anxious because they could no longer reach Angela. Tristan had stopped playing as his mother. The family of Angela then thought it would be best to contact the police. As they spoke to the police, they mentioned that Angela used a crutch. This was the moment that the investigators knew who the victim likely was, and so the police soon went over to Angela's home. When they arrived, they were let in by Tristan. He was eerily calm. Within just minutes, an officer stumbled across what he thought looked like a murder kit, and with this, Tristan was arrested. By that evening, police were saying that they were no longer actively searching for anyone else in relation to the crime, and that there was no evidence of a wider risk to the public. They believed that they had already caught their perpetrator, and they weren't wrong. A large part of this came from the evidence available almost immediately. The dictaphone recording was central. It captured the horrific violence inside the house. Officers heard Angela's terrifying pleas for help, something that must have been horrific to hear. This was the first point at which they knew the attack had been going on for hours before the pair left home. That alone would have made this an extraordinary piece of evidence. However, it didn't stand alone. They also soon uncovered CCTV and doorbell footage, which traced their movements after they had left the house. It showed them heading out together, and then it captured Tristan, who returned home alone. Every move that occurred that night could be reconstructed from both sound and sight, something which makes the case rather unique. Investigators then recovered the searches from his laptop, along with other devices. These showed his research into killing methods, blood and DNA removal, and body disposal. The police also found his Discord. He posted frequent messages blaming Angela for his perceived failures and unhappiness. He also described wanting to kill her. His excuse and reason was that he wanted to do it for revenge, justice, and vengeance. They also found that he had a fixation with Dexter and American Psycho. He saw himself like these characters. They eventually found a chilling post on this app. He wrote, "Tonight's the night." This was written on the 23rd of October. All of this showed intent, planning, and motive. The murder kit they found included the hammer. Police also found a blood-stained water bottle and Angela's phone hidden at the bottom of his wardrobe. The phone showed that concealment began almost immediately. The case against him was already concrete. After his arrest, Tristan was interviewed over several days. During these interviews, he gave no-comment answers. Whether that was a legal strategy, emotional withdrawal, or something else, it didn't slow down the case for long, because the supporting evidence was just too strong. Once charged, Tristan was brought before the courts fairly quickly. He first appeared on the 28th of October 2025 for the formal remand stage. At that first hearing, Tristan gave a no plea. The case was adjourned for psychiatric material to be prepared. This included an assessment and report to determine if he was fit to give a plea. However, by the 5th of February 2026, Tristan pleaded guilty to the murder of his mother. From that point on, the proceedings were no longer about whether he had done it or not. It was about the sentence, about the culpability, and ultimately, what the minimum term would be before parole could even be considered. Psychiatrists gave the court evidence about Tristan's autism, ADHD, and possible emerging personality disorders. There was also some reporting that his background included discussion of childhood trauma. However, the full details of this are not entirely known. Even with that psychiatric material in play, the conclusion was clear. He was fit to plead when he did, and he knew what he was doing at the time of the murder. The court determined that he was able to exercise self-control. Therefore, defending Tristan from a point of view of culpability was a non-starter. This left the defense in the position of sentence mitigation. His age mattered. He was only 18. His diagnoses mattered. The broader issue of support, or the lack thereof it, was also considered. But none of this displaced the central facts. He had planned this killing over weeks, bought the tools for it, researched how to do it, and cleaned up afterwards. He also even pretended to be his own dead mother. And on top of all of this, he recorded it all. He must have wanted to play it back for his own twisted enjoyment. The sentencing hearing took place on the 25th of March 2026. Angela's family were in attendance, and their statements gave the hearing much of its emotional weight. Ethan described his mother as the most important person in his life and said that all she ever did was love Tristan. Sarah Gunther, Angela's sister, described her as not just a sister, but also a best friend. She spoke about the anger and heartbreak the murder had caused the entire family, but also about the love that Angela had given to both of her sons throughout her life. Meanwhile, Tristan showed little to no remorse. His demeanor in the court sentencing was reported as subdued, with little visible emotion. The starting point for Tristan's sentence was 25 years. However, this was increased to 27 years because of the aggravating factors. such as the fact that the whole sequence began as a prolonged domestic abuse case in Angela's home. Another was the fact that she was particularly vulnerable because of her knee injury and had limited mobility, but then it was reduced by 1/6 for his guilty plea, bringing it down to 22 years and 6 months. So he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. This minimum term expires when he reaches 41. But release is not automatic. It would depend on the parole board, and if he was ever released, he would remain on license for the rest of his life. Angela was a 45-year-old mother, teacher, colleague, sister and friend who spent the final phase of her life trying to help the son who would eventually kill her. She was even frightened enough to question whether she was safe in her own bedroom. And what did Tristan want with that recording? It's terrifying to even contemplate. And what's even scarier is that if Tristan had committed the murder only 10 days prior, when he was 17, the sentencing would have been significantly lower.